The windshield wipers scraped against the glass with a sound like weeping. Evelyn Marsh pressed her palm flat against the dashboard, steadying herself as the old Buick shuddered through another pothole, its suspension groaning in protest. Outside, the world had turned to gray sky bleeding into gray road, gray mountains rising on either side like the walls of a narrowing corridor. "How much further?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Harold had been checking the map every 15 minutes since they'd passed the last town, a place so small it didn't even have a proper grocery store, just a gas station with a hand-painted sign and a woman behind the counter who'd looked at them with something between pity and concern. "Another 40 miles to the pass," Harold said, his voice carrying the careful steadiness he'd adopted 3 weeks ago, when their daughter Rachel had handed them the eviction papers with the same expression she'd worn as a child, confessing she'd broken the good china. Only this time, there was no apology, no guilt, just efficiency. "We've found you a lovely little place in Ridgemont. Very affordable. You'll love the mountain air." Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to shut out the memory, but it played anyway. The way Rachel had walked through the house Evelyn and Harold had lived in for 42 years. The house where they'd raised 4 children, buried 2 dogs, celebrated anniversaries, and mourned losses. Rachel had walked through it like an appraiser, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs, calculating their worth in dollars rather than decades. "The market's hot right now. You won't get a better offer. And frankly, Mom, you and Dad can't afford the upkeep anymore. Be practical." Practical. That was Rachel's favorite word. She'd been practical when she'd convinced them to sign over power of attorney, just as a precaution, nothing to worry about. She'd been practical when she'd helped consolidate their savings, just to simplify things. And she'd been practical 3 weeks ago when she'd arrived with her brother Michael and informed them that the house was sold. The papers were signed, and there was a lovely little place waiting for them in Ridgemont, 800 miles from everyone they knew, in a town they'd never heard of, with rent that would consume nearly everything left of Harold's pension after their children had finished managing their affairs. "The engine's running hot again," Harold muttered, pulling Evelyn from her thoughts. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and she noticed for the first time how thin his hands had become. When had her husband grown old? When had the broad-shouldered man who'd carried her over the threshold of their first apartment transformed into this fragile figure hunched over the wheel? Of a dying car? Should we stop? Where? He gestured at the emptiness stretching in every direction. The road wound through a valley that might have been beautiful in summer, but now looked desolate under the iron sky. Snow dusted the higher elevations, and the trees, what few there were, stood bare and skeletal against the horizon. Evelyn reached into the back seat and retrieved her thermos, the dented silver one Harold had given her on their 5th anniversary, back when gifts still meant something more than obligation. She poured him a cup of coffee, steam rising in the cold air of the car. The heater had given up somewhere around noon. "Thank you, Evie." Harold's voice softened the way it always did when he used her nickname. 53 years of marriage lived in that single syllable. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he couldn't have known what their children would become, that the decades of sacrifice, Harold working double shifts at the plant until his back gave out, Evelyn taking in other people's laundry, and ironing until her hands ached, hadn't been wasted just because the recipients had forgotten the cost. But the words stuck in her throat, crowded out by a grief that had no shape, no edges, no name. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger required energy she no longer had. It was something deeper. Something that felt like watching a house burn down from the inside. "Weather's coming in," Harold observed. Ahead, the gray sky had darkened to charcoal, and the wind had picked up, buffeting the Buick with sudden gusts that made the steering wheel jump in Harold's grip. Evelyn turned on the radio, but static filled the speakers. They'd lost the last clear station an hour ago, and now there was nothing but white noise and the occasional ghostly fragment of a voice speaking words she couldn't understand. "We should have left earlier," she said, then immediately regretted it. Harold had wanted to wait, hoping for a call from their son David, the one who'd always been the peacemaker. The gentle one who'd held Evelyn's hand at her mother's funeral and promised he'd always be there for them. The call never came. David had sent a text instead. "Safe travels. The new place will be great. Let's catch up when you're settled." 8 words. 42 years of loving him, and he'd reduced it to 8 words. The first snowflakes appeared just as the road began to climb. They were light at first, dancing in the headlights like moths, almost pretty. Evelyn remembered a Christmas 50 years ago when she and Harold had driven through a snowstorm to spend the holiday with his parents, young and foolish, and convinced that love would carry them through anything. It had, she supposed. Love had carried them through a lot, but love hadn't protected them from their own children. "Evie," Harold's voice was tight. "I can't see the road." She leaned forward, peering through the windshield. What had been gentle flurries minutes ago had transformed into a curtain of white so dense it seemed solid. The headlights illuminated nothing but swirling chaos. Snow so thick she couldn't tell where the sky ended and the ground began. "Pull over," she said. "Just pull over until it passes. There's no shoulder." "I can't tell where." The car lurched suddenly, and Evelyn grabbed the door handle as the Buick slid sideways. Harold wrestled with the steering wheel, but the tires had lost their grip on the icy road, and for one terrible moment, they were simply spinning, carried by momentum and physics toward whatever waited in the white. The car came to rest with a shudder, tilted slightly to one side. The engine coughed twice, wheezed, and died. Silence. Evelyn became aware of her own breathing, rapid and shallow. Beside her, Harold sat motionless, his hands still locked on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No, you?" "No." Harold turned the key. The engine made a sound like a sick animal, a grinding whine that rose in pitch and then faded to clicking. He tried again. Same result. Again. Nothing. "The cold," he said quietly. "Batteries dead, or the fuel lines frozen." Or, he stopped, and Evelyn watched something pass across his face that she'd never seen before in all their years together. It took her a moment to recognize it. Defeat. "Harold, I'm sorry, Evie." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I should have done something. Fought harder. Stopped them. I let our own children." He couldn't finish. Evelyn reached across the console and took his hand. His fingers were ice cold despite the thin gloves he wore, the good gloves long since sold along with everything else of value. "This isn't your fault, isn't it?" He turned to look at her, and she saw tears gathering in his eyes, freezing at the corners. "I was supposed to protect you, provide for you, and now we're going to die in a snowstorm on a road in the middle of nowhere, because I couldn't even protect you from our own family. We're not going to die." But even as she said it, Evelyn felt the cold seeping into the car, working its way through the seams of the windows, the cracks in the floor, the spaces between her layers of clothing. She thought about the survival shows she'd watched on television, back when they still had television, back when they still had a home. How long could someone survive in freezing temperatures? An hour? 2? The thermos of coffee would keep them warm for a little while, but not long enough. Not nearly long enough. Harold reached for his phone, the ancient flip phone he'd refused to upgrade because the buttons were easier for his arthritis. No signal, of course. They'd lost reception 20 miles back. "Someone will come," Evelyn said. "Another car, a snowplow." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. They'd passed maybe 3 cars in the last 2 hours, and that was before the storm. In this weather, no one would be on the road. No one sane, anyway. The cold was getting worse. She could feel it in her bones now, the particular ache of her arthritic joints screaming in protest. Harold's breathing had become visible, small clouds forming and dissipating with each exhale. The windshield was already fogging, then freezing, a layer of frost creeping across the glass from the edges inward. "There's a blanket in the trunk," Harold said. "The emergency kit." He moved to open his door, but the wind caught it immediately, nearly ripping it from his grip. Snow poured in, carried on air so cold it felt solid. He pulled it shut again, shaking. "I'll get it," Evelyn said. "No, absolutely not. Harold, you can barely feel your hands. I'll be faster." Before he could argue, she was out of the car, immediately swallowed by the white. The wind hit her like a physical force, driving snow into her eyes, her nose, her mouth. She couldn't see the trunk, couldn't see anything. She kept one hand on the car, using it as a guide, shuffling toward the back. Her foot caught on something, a rock, the edge of the road, and she stumbled, losing contact with the car for one terrifying moment. White in every direction. No up, no down, no sense of where she was in relation to anything. EV. She followed the sound of Harold's voice, her hands outstretched until they touched cold metal. The trunk, she fumbled with the latch, her fingers clumsy and numb. Finally, it popped open, and she grabbed the first thing she touched, the old wool blanket they'd kept for emergencies. A blanket that smelled faintly of mothballs, and the cedar chest where they'd stored it for years before their children had sold that too. She was making her way back along the car when she heard it. A whimper, faint, almost lost in the howl of the wind, but unmistakable. Evelyn froze. The sound came again, high and plaintive from somewhere to her left. An animal sound, a sound of pain. Hello? The word was absurd. Who said hello to a noise in a blizzard? But it escaped her anyway, some instinct overriding sense. For a moment, nothing. Then, emerging from the wall of white, she saw it, a dog, golden fur matted with ice and snow, moving slowly, heavily, favoring its front left leg. It was limping toward her, and even through the storm, even in the chaos of wind and cold, she could see its eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost human. The dog stopped a few feet away, shivering violently. Blood colored the snow around its paw, a bright arterial red that stood out against the white, like a wound in the world itself. "Oh, sweet thing," Evelyn breathed. "Oh, you poor thing. If you're finding yourself drawn into Evelyn and Harold's story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, and let's continue together." The dog, a golden retriever, Evelyn could see now, with a broad chest and intelligent eyes, took another step toward her, then sat down heavily in the snow, as if the effort of standing had simply become too much. "Harold!" Evelyn called. "Harold, there's a dog!" She heard the car door open, heard her husband's shuffling steps through the snow. He appeared beside her, his eyes widening when he saw the animal. "Good Lord, it's hurt. Look at its leg." The retriever watched them both, making no move to flee. Even hurt, even freezing, it held itself with a kind of dignity that made Evelyn's chest ache. She thought of their own dogs, Benny and Scout, who'd passed years ago and were buried in the backyard of the house that no longer belonged to them. "We need to get it in the car," she said. "We need to help it. Evie, we can barely help ourselves." But Harold was already moving forward, his hands extended. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl. It simply watched, those golden brown eyes tracking Harold's approach with what looked like expectation. "Easy now," Harold murmured, the way he used to murmur to their own animals. "Easy, boy. We're not going to hurt you." He knelt in the snow. Later, Evelyn would marvel at that, at her 73-year-old husband with his bad knees kneeling in a blizzard for a strange dog, and gently lifted the retriever. The animal was heavy, maybe 60 pounds, but Harold carried it to the car with a strength Evelyn hadn't seen in him for years. They settled the dog in the back seat, wrapped in the emergency blanket. Evelyn climbed in beside it, and Harold got back behind the wheel, though the engine remained dead, the car just a metal shell against the storm. "Let me see the paw," Evelyn said softly. The retriever allowed her to examine it, barely flinching as she gently wiped away the blood with a corner of the blanket. The cut was deep, glass, maybe, or a sharp rock, but clean. "It needs stitches," she said, "and warmth, and food." She laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "So do we." The dog turned its head and looked at her. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned toward the window, staring out at the storm with that same strange intensity. "Harold," Evelyn said, "it's looking at something. It's looking at snow. That's all there is." But the dog whined, shifted, pressed its nose against the glass. Then it looked back at Evelyn, then at the window again. "I think it wants us to follow it." "That's insane." "I know. We can't go out. There. We'll die. We'll die if we stay here too." The words hung between them, plain and terrible. They both knew it was true. The cold was already winning, creeping into their bodies, slowing their hearts, thickening their blood. They had maybe an hour left, maybe less. The dog whined again, more urgently now. It struggled to stand despite its injured leg, pressing against the door. Harold turned to look at his wife. In the dim light, she could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else. A question. Evie, if this is how it ends, then let's not end it huddled in a dead car. Her voice was stronger than she expected. Let's go down fighting. Let's follow the dog. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. The same smile he'd given her 53 years ago when she'd agreed to marry him. The smile that said, "Whatever happens, we're in this together. You always did have a thing for strays," he said. They bundled themselves as best they could, the blanket torn in half, wrapped around their shoulders, their arms linked. Harold helped the dog out of the car, and it stood for a moment, testing its injured leg. Then, with a determination that seemed almost fierce, it began to walk, not down the road, not back the way they'd come. Into the white, into the storm, towards something Evelyn couldn't see but could somehow feel, waiting in the darkness beyond the snow. "Stay close to me," Harold said. "Always," she replied. And they followed the dog, into the blizzard. The cold stopped being cold after a while. It became something else, a presence, a weight, a slow erasure of feeling that started at Evelyn's fingers and toes and worked its way inward. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Couldn't feel much of anything except Harold's arm locked through hers and the dim golden shape of the dog moving through the white ahead of them. They'd been walking for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, maybe 30. Time had lost its meaning in the blizzard, reduced to the simple rhythm of one step, then another, then another. The dog never looked back, never hesitated. It moved with purpose, limping but determined, as if it knew exactly where it was going, and would get there even if it had to drag itself the whole way. Evie. Harold's voice was thin, barely audible over the wind. "Evie, I need to rest. Just a little further. I can't feel my legs." She stopped, turning to look at him. In the dim light filtering through the storm, his face was gray, his lips tinged with blue. Snow had accumulated in his eyebrows, in the creases of his face, turning him into something that looked carved from ice. "Lean on me," she said. "I'll pull you down. Then we'll go down together." He tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. His weight shifted against her, heavier than it had been, and she realized with a cold spike of terror that he was fading. Her Harold, her rock, her constant for more than half a century, he was slipping away from her in this white void, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The dog had stopped. It stood a few yards ahead, watching them, its golden fur almost invisible against the snow. It whined once, a sound of impatience or concern. Evelyn couldn't tell which. "We're coming," she said to it, knowing it was absurd, talking to a dog as if it could understand. "Just give us a moment." But the retriever didn't give them a moment. Instead, it came back, pressing its body against Harold's legs, lending warmth, lending support. And then it moved forward again, slower this time, matching their painful shuffle through the deepening snow. Evelyn had stopped praying years ago. Around the time Rachel had started managing their finances and the bills had started getting lost. Around the time she'd realized that her children saw her not as a mother, but as an obstacle to be managed. But she found herself praying now, not in words but in feeling, a desperate reaching towards something larger than the storm, larger than the cold, larger than the terrible smallness of two old people dying on a mountain road. "Please, not like this. Not yet," the dog barked. It was the first sound besides the wind and their own labored breathing, and it cut through the white like a blade. Evelyn raised her head, squinting into the storm, and saw it. Gates. Iron gates, massive and ornate, emerging from the blizzard like a hallucination. They were open, thrown wide as if waiting, and beyond them, lights. Actual lights, warm and golden, cutting through the darkness. "Harold," her voice cracked. "Harold, look." He raised his head, slowly, with the effort of a man lifting a boulder. His eyes widened. The dog was already through the gates, moving faster now, despite its limp. heading toward the lights with the certainty of a creature returning home. And home, Evelyn realized as they followed, stumbling through the gates and up a path that had been cleared of snow, recently cleared, she noticed, the edges still sharp and fresh, was exactly what this was. A house. No, a mansion. Larger than anything Evelyn had ever seen outside of magazines. It rose 3 stories against the dark sky, its windows blazing with warm light, stone walls, ivy-covered even in winter, a columned entrance that wouldn't have looked out of place in a period film. Smoke curled from multiple chimneys, and as they drew closer, Evelyn could smell it. Wood smoke, rich and real, the smell of warmth, of safety, of life. The dog bounded up the front steps, then turned and barked again, as if to say, "Hurry, hurry, you're almost there." They climbed the steps together, Harold leaning so heavily on Evelyn now that she wasn't sure who was carrying whom. The front door, massive, oak, with iron fixtures that looked older than the country, loomed before them. Evelyn raised her hand to knock. The door flew open before her knuckles touched wood. Light poured out, blinding after the darkness of the storm. Warmth hit her like a physical force, and she actually staggered, overwhelmed by the sudden absence of cold. Through streaming eyes, she saw figures, people, moving toward them, hands reaching out. My God, they're half frozen. Get blankets, quickly. Someone call Dr. Harrison. Is that really them? The last voice cut through the chaos, different from the others. Not alarmed, not urgent. Wondering, Evelyn blinked, her vision clearing, and found herself looking at a woman in her 50s. Dressed in the crisp uniform of household staff, her face frozen in an expression that Evelyn couldn't quite read. Behind her, other staff members had stopped what they were doing, bringing blankets, closing doors, and were staring at Evelyn and Harold with that same strange expression. Not like strangers, like people they'd been waiting for. "Mrs. Marsh." The woman in uniform spoke carefully, as if afraid of the answer. "Is it really you?" Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came. She didn't understand, couldn't understand. This woman knew her name. This stranger, in this impossible mansion in the middle of a blizzard, knew her name. "Who?" Harold started, but the effort was too much. His legs buckled, and he would have fallen if 2 staff members hadn't caught him, easing him down onto a bench that appeared from nowhere, wrapping him in blankets that seemed to materialize out of thin air. The dog, Evelyn had forgotten about the dog, pushed past them all and disappeared into the house, limping but purposeful, as if its job was done and there were other matters to attend to. "Please," Evelyn managed. "I don't understand what's happening." The woman in uniform, housekeeper, Evelyn thought, though the word seemed inadequate for this place, took her hands gently. Her grip was warm, solid, real. "Mrs. Marsh, you're safe now, both of you. You're safe." Her eyes glistened. "He's been looking for you for so long. When Scout came home alone, we thought. We feared the worst." "Scout?" "The dog. He's been going out every day for the past week, searching. We didn't know what he was searching for until now." A man appeared at the woman's elbow, older, gray-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. A doctor, Evelyn realized, as he bent to check Harold's pulse, his pupils, the color of his fingernails. "Moderate hypothermia," he announced. "Both of them. We need to warm them slowly. Hot drinks, not hot water. Blankets, not heating pads. Margaret, prepare the East Suite, and someone needs to tell Mr. Aldridge that his guests have arrived." His guests. Evelyn felt the words settle into her chest like a stone. She wasn't a guest. She was a trespasser, a storm refugee, an old woman who had followed a dog to a stranger's door, wasn't she? "I'm sorry," she said, to the room at large, to no one in particular. "We didn't mean to intrude. Our car broke down, and the dog, your dog, we didn't know where else to go." The housekeeper, Margaret, squeezed her hands again. "Mrs. Marsh, you haven't intruded. This is exactly where you were supposed to be." She paused, and something passed across her face. Hesitation, perhaps, or the weight of information too heavy to share all at once. "Mr. Aldridge has been trying to find you for 3 years. Before we continue, I want to pause and ask, Have you ever had a stranger help you when you needed it most? Someone who appeared at exactly the right moment? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. The East Suite turned out to be larger than the entire apartment Evelyn and Harold had been driving toward, the lovely little place in Ridgemont that their children had selected for them. 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting room with a fireplace already crackling, thick rugs underfoot, heavy curtains drawn against the storm still raging outside. They'd been given dry clothes, warm flannel pajamas, wool socks, robes so soft Evelyn almost cried when she put hers on. The doctor had examined them both thoroughly, pronounced them lucky to be alive, and ordered bed rest, fluids, and food. Food had arrived within the hour. Not hospital fare, not nursing home portions, but real food, roast chicken and vegetables, fresh bread with butter, soup that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it. Evelyn and Harold sat in the sitting room, plates balanced on their laps, eating in silence because there were no words for what had happened, no framework for understanding where they were or how they'd gotten here. The dog, Scout, had reappeared as they ate. Its leg had been bandaged, professionally from the look of it, and it lay now on a rug near the fireplace, watching them with those intelligent golden eyes. Every few minutes, it would look toward the door, then back at them, as if waiting for something. "That dog saved our lives," Harold said finally. It was the first complete sentence he'd spoken since they'd arrived. "I know. It knew where to go. It knew we needed help. I know. Evie." He set down his plate, his face grave. "That woman knew your name. How did she know your name?" Before Evelyn could answer, not that she had an answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Margaret entered, her expression careful. "I'm sorry to disturb you. You should be resting. But Mr. Aldridge has asked if he might speak with you, if you're feeling well enough. I told him it could wait until morning, but he was quite insistent." "Mr. Aldridge?" Harold's voice sharpened. "Who is Mr. Aldridge? The owner of this house?" Margaret paused. "He's not well, I'm afraid. He hasn't been well for some time, but he's been waiting for this conversation for years, and I think—" She stopped, seeming to choose her words with care. "I think it might help you to hear what he has to say." Evelyn looked at Harold. In his eyes, she saw her own confusion, her own fear, her own desperate need to understand. But she also saw something else, the same stubbornness that had carried him through a factory job that broke his body, through raising 4 children on not enough money, through watching those children become strangers who stole their security and called it love. "We'll see him," Evelyn said. Margaret nodded, unsurprised. "I'll take you to him." They walked through hallways that seemed to go on forever. Past paintings that probably cost more than Evelyn had earned in her entire life. Past rooms filled with books and art and furniture that looked like it belonged in museums. Scout walked with them, pressing close to Evelyn's leg, a warm presence in the cold grandeur. "How long has Mr. Aldridge lived here?" Harold asked. "Nearly 40 years," Margaret replied. "He built most of it himself, not physically, of course, but he designed it, oversaw every detail. This house is his life's work." She paused at a door, heavy oak, like the front entrance, but smaller, more private. "He's in here. I should warn you, he's very ill. The doctors say it could be days, or it could be months. No one knows. But his mind is still sharp. Whatever he tells you, please believe that he means every word." She opened the door. The room beyond was a study, lined with books, warmed by another fireplace, lit by soft lamps that cast everything in amber. A hospital bed had been set up near the windows, incongruous in the elegant space, and in it lay a man. He was old, older than Harold, Evelyn guessed, though illness made such things hard to judge. Thin, fragile, his skin nearly translucent against white sheets. But his eyes were alive, bright with an intensity that made Evelyn's breath catch. Scout bounded forward, leaping onto the bed with a grace that belied his injury, settling beside the old man with a sigh of contentment. The man's hand, trembling slightly, found the dog's head and stroked it gently. "You found them," he murmured to Scout. "You actually found them." Then he looked up, and his eyes met Evelyn's, and she felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she didn't understand, a connection she couldn't explain. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. "Mr. Marsh, please, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and I'm afraid I may not have much time left to say it." They sat in chairs that had been positioned near the bed, clearly placed in anticipation of this meeting. Up close, the man looked even frailer, but his voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "My name is Thomas Aldridge. 62 years ago, I did something unforgivable. I've spent every day since trying to make amends, and now, thanks to a blizzard and a very determined dog, I finally have the chance." He paused, drawing a careful breath. On the bed, Scout watched his master with an expression that looked almost worried. "Mrs. Marsh, Evelyn, did your father ever tell you about his business partner? The one who disappeared in 1962? Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know about that?" "Because I was his partner." Thomas Aldridge's voice cracked. "And because I was the one who destroyed him." The story came out slowly, painfully, like blood from a wound that had never properly healed. 62 years ago, Thomas Aldridge and Robert Whitmore had been young men with a dream. They'd started a small manufacturing company together, pooling their savings, working 18-hour days, building something from nothing. They'd been brothers in everything but blood, and then Thomas had betrayed him. "There was an opportunity," Thomas said, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the room, beyond the present, "a contract that would have made us rich, but it required capital we didn't have. A man came to me, a man with money and no scruples, and offered to finance the expansion, but he wanted Robert out. He said Robert was too honest, too principled. He'd never agree to the corners we'd need to cut." He stopped, and in the silence, Evelyn could hear the storm still raging outside, muffled but relentless. "I told myself it was for the best, that Robert would understand eventually, that the money would be enough to compensate him for." Thomas's voice broke. "I forged his signature on papers that transferred his shares to me. I took everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, and I told myself it was business. My father lost everything," Evelyn said, and the words came out flat, dead, carrying 50 years of grief. "He came home one day and told my mother that his partner had stolen the company. He never recovered. He died 2 years later. The doctors called it a heart attack, but my mother always said he died of a broken heart." "I know." Tears were sliding down Thomas Aldridge's weathered cheeks. "I know what I did to him. I've known every day since. The money came, just as the man promised. More money than I'd ever dreamed. But it was blood money, and it poisoned everything it touched." Scout whined softly, pressing closer to his master. Thomas's hand continued its rhythmic stroking, drawing comfort from the dog's warmth. "I tried to find your family. For decades I tried. But your mother moved after your father died, and she changed her name. And you—" He looked at Evelyn with an expression that was equal parts desperation and hope. "You became Evelyn Marsh instead of Evelyn Whitmore when you married. I lost the trail." "Then how—" "A private investigator. A good one, who'd been searching for 2 years before he finally found you. I wrote to you, Mrs. Marsh. Dozens of letters. I called your home, your children's homes. I sent messengers with certified documents explaining what I wanted to do." The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn gripped the arms of her chair, steadying herself. "I never received any letters," she said slowly. "No calls, no messengers." Thomas nodded, and his expression hardened slightly. "I suspected as much. After my investigator finally located you last year, he did some additional digging into your financial situation, your living arrangements, your family dynamics." He paused. "Your children, Mrs. Marsh, have been very careful to control all communication that reaches you." Harold made a sound, not quite a word, something rawer and more painful. "The letters," Thomas continued, "were sent to your children's addresses first, at their request. They said they wanted to verify my claims before concerning you with potential scams. They never passed them along. The calls were intercepted. The messengers were turned away." "Why?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would they?" "Because of what I was offering." Thomas Aldridge looked at her with infinite sadness. I wanted to make amends. I wanted to give back what I stole from your father, plus 60 years of interest and growth. The company I built with blood money has become very valuable, Mrs. Marsh, and I have no family, no heirs, no one to leave it to." He reached toward the bedside table, his thin fingers closing around a folder thick with papers. "Your children knew that I intended to leave everything, this house, the company, all of it, to Robert Whitmore's descendants. To you," he held out the folder. "They've been hiding my attempts to contact you because they were afraid that you'd accept, and their control over your pension, your savings, your lives would end." Evelyn took the folder with numb fingers. Inside, she saw legal documents, financial statements, letters marked with dates going back years. Letters addressed to her, opened and resealed, with handwritten notes and margins she recognized. Rachel's precise script, Michael's hurried scrawl. "Don't forward. Potential elder fraud scheme. Destroyed original. Kept copy for records." Dad asking questions. Told him it was junk mail. Her children had known. For years, her children had known that someone was trying to reach her, trying to give her the life her father had been denied, and they had hidden it. They had stolen from her just as surely as Thomas Aldridge had stolen from her father, and they had done it while smiling, while hugging her goodbye, while sending her to die in a cabin in the mountains, with nothing but a pension they controlled. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. And Evelyn Marsh, who had not cried when her children took her home, who had not cried when her husband's body failed in the snow, who had not cried in decades because tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, Evelyn Marsh began to weep. Harold held her while she cried. He didn't speak. There were no words for this, no comfort adequate to the wound that had been opened, but his arms were around her, solid and warm, the same arms that had held her through childbirth and funerals and every small grief in between. Evelyn buried her face in his shoulder and let 50 years of unshed tears finally fall. On the bed, Thomas Aldridge watched in silence, his own tears still wet on his cheeks. Scout had moved to the foot of the bed, his golden head resting on his paws, eyes moving between the crying woman and his dying master, as if he understood that something profound and painful was happening, something beyond a dog's power to fix. Margaret appeared at some point, Evelyn didn't know when, and quietly gathered the scattered papers, placing them back in the folder with the careful reverence of someone handling sacred texts. She set a box of tissues on the table beside Evelyn's chair, poured glasses of water for everyone, and then retreated to a corner of the room, present but unobtrusive. When Evelyn's tears finally slowed, when her breathing steadied, and she could lift her head without feeling like the world would collapse, she found Thomas watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry for what I did to your father. I'm sorry for what your children have done to you. I'm sorry that my attempts to make amends caused you more pain. It's not your fault." The words came out hoarse, scraped raw. What they did, what Rachel and Michael and... She couldn't finish. Couldn't say their names without feeling something tear inside her. "David, too," Harold said quietly. His voice was steady, but Evelyn could feel the tension in his body, the way his muscles had gone rigid. David knew. He must have. They share everything. They plan everything together. "And Karen?" Evelyn asked, thinking of their youngest, the quiet one, the one who'd always seemed slightly apart from her siblings' schemes. Harold was silent for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe not. Karen stopped coming to family gatherings 2 years ago. Remember? She and Rachel had that fight, and then she just disappeared." Evelyn did remember. She'd been hurt by Karen's absence, confused by the sudden distance. Rachel had explained it away. Karen's busy. Karen's going through something. Karen will come around eventually. But Karen hadn't come around, and eventually Evelyn had stopped asking, because asking seemed to make Rachel angry, and making Rachel angry had consequences. Consequences like losing their home, like being shipped off to die in a mountain cabin, like never knowing that a stranger had been trying to save them for years. "The letters," she said, turning back to Thomas. "How many did you send?" 47. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could hear the weight behind it. 47 letters over 3 years, plus phone calls, My assistant kept a log. 112 attempts to reach you by telephone. 17 certified documents that required signature confirmation, all of them returned, signed by your children on your behalf. They forged our signatures. Harold's voice was flat. They forged our signatures on legal documents. I suspected as much. My lawyers confirmed it 6 months ago, when the handwriting analysis came back. That's when I hired a second investigator, not to find you, but to understand why you weren't responding. What he discovered was... Thomas paused, seeming to search for the right word. Systematic. He gestured to Margaret, who brought forward a second folder, thicker than the first. Your children have been managing your affairs for nearly a decade, yes? Power of attorney, consolidated accounts, handling your correspondence and bills? Evelyn nodded slowly. It had seemed so reasonable at the time. Rachel had explained that it would simplify everything, that elderly people were targets for scams and fraud, that having family oversight was just common sense. And Evelyn, exhausted from Harold's health struggles and her own mounting medical bills, had agreed. What harm could it do, letting her children help? In that time, Thomas continued, they've redirected approximately 60% of your pension payments into accounts they control. They've sold personal property, jewelry, furniture, your husband's tool collection, and kept the proceeds. They've taken out loans in your names, using your home as collateral, and defaulted on them. The sale of your house wasn't voluntary, Mrs. Marsh. It was a foreclosure, initiated by the bank when those loans went unpaid. The room tilted again. Evelyn gripped Harold's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. They told us, Harold started, then stopped. They told us the market was hot, that we should sell while we could get a good price. The market had nothing to do with it. Your house was seized, and your children positioned themselves to capture whatever equity remained after the bank took its share, which, thanks to the loans, wasn't much. The lovely little place in Ridgemont they found for you? It's a property owned by a company in which your son Michael holds a 40% stake. The rent you would have paid, most of your remaining income, would have gone directly into his pocket. Evelyn thought she might be sick. The room swam before her eyes, and she had to close them, had to focus on breathing, on the feel of Harold's hand in hers, on the crackle of the fire and the sound of the storm outside. Real things, solid things, anchors against the vertigo of discovering that everything she'd believed about her children was a lie. Why? The word came out broken. We gave them everything. We sacrificed everything for them. Harold worked until his body gave out. I took in laundry until my hands cracked and bled. We went without so they could have. How could they? She couldn't finish. I wish I had an answer, Thomas said gently. I've spent 60 years asking myself how I could betray the man who trusted me most. I still don't fully understand it. Greed is a kind of madness, Mrs. Marsh. It convinces you that what you want is more important than who you hurt. It tells you that the people you're stealing from won't really suffer, or that they'd do the same to you, or that you'll make it right somehow later when you have enough. His eyes drifted to the window where the storm still raged, snow piling against the glass. There's never enough, he continued. That's what I learned too late. I built this house, this fortune, this empire of guilt, and none of it filled the hole that betraying Robert left in me. I've been trying to give it away for 20 years. To charities, to foundations, to anyone who might put it to good use. But it kept growing, kept multiplying, as if the universe was mocking me with abundance I didn't deserve. Scout lifted his head, whining softly. Thomas's hand found the dog's fur again, drawing comfort. When my investigator finally found your trail, I thought, at last I can make it right. I can give Robert's daughter the life he should have had, the security he deserved. I can die knowing I did one good thing with all this blood money. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I didn't anticipate that your own children would be as ruthless as I was. The fire had burned low by the time they finished talking. Margaret had come and gone several times, bringing tea, adjusting Thomas's pillows, ensuring the elderly couple had everything they needed. The storm showed no signs of abating, but inside the mansion, time seemed suspended, held in amber by the weight of revelations. Thomas had told them everything Every letter, every phone call, every legal document. He'd shown them the investigators' reports, the financial analysis, the evidence trail that led inexorably to one conclusion. Their children had been systematically stripping them of everything for years, all while smiling and hugging and pretending to care. "What happens now?" Harold asked. His voice had grown stronger as the evening wore on, color returning to his cheeks. He sat straighter in his chair, and Evelyn recognized the posture. It was the same one he'd adopted decades ago when facing down a union-busting foreman at the plant, the same squared shoulders he'd shown when their youngest was diagnosed with pneumonia and the bills threatened to drown them. Her Harold, still a fighter, even now. "That depends on what you want," Thomas replied. "I've already changed my will to leave everything to you, or rather to a trust established in your names, structured so that your children cannot access it or contest it. My lawyers are very good and very creative. The paperwork is airtight. We don't want your money." The words came out of Evelyn before she could stop them. "I mean, I'm grateful, truly I am, but taking what my father should have had, it feels like theft," Harold finished. "The same crime done to us, done again to someone else." Thomas smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." It's exactly what Robert would have said. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly as he repositioned himself. Scout immediately moved closer, pressing against his master's side. "There's another option. Several options, actually. My lawyers have prepared a range of scenarios." Margaret brought forward a third folder. How many folders were there? And Thomas gestured for her to hand it to Harold. Option 1. You accept the full inheritance. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million, plus this property and the associated company holdings. You'd be wealthy beyond imagining, and your children would have no legal claim to any of it. Harold's hands trembled as he held the folder. 200 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Option 2. We establish a charitable foundation in your father's name, the Robert Whitmore Foundation for Workers' Rights, perhaps, or whatever cause you believe he would have supported. The bulk of the estate goes to that foundation, and you receive a more modest inheritance, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your lives, to travel if you wish, to never worry about rent or medical bills again. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. This was closer to right. This was something she could accept without feeling like she'd become the thing she hated. Option 3, Thomas continued, is a combination. Some personal inheritance, some to the foundation, and the remainder. He paused, and his expression shifted, becoming almost mischievous. The remainder goes into a legal fund specifically designed to pursue justice against those who defraud the elderly. Your children, Mrs. Marsh, would be among the first targets. The room went very quiet. "You want us to prosecute them," Harold said slowly. "I want you to have the option. Whether you exercise it is entirely your choice." Thomas's eyes met Evelyn's. "They stole from you. They forged your signatures, manipulated your finances, attempted to isolate you in a place where no one would notice if you simply faded away. Those are crimes. Serious crimes, but I know they're also your children, and that nothing I can say will make that less complicated. If Evelyn's situation has stirred something in you, a memory, a parallel, a feeling you want to share, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below, and let's continue this journey together." They stayed with Thomas until the early hours of the morning, talking about things that mattered and things that didn't, sharing stories of Robert Whitmore, whom Thomas had loved like a brother before he destroyed him. Evelyn learned things about her father she'd never known, his dry sense of humor, his habit of feeding stray cats behind the factory, the way he'd once stood up to a mob enforcer who tried to muscle in on their business. "He never backed down," Thomas said, his voice thick with memory. That was Robert. Once he decided something was right, that was it. He'd go down fighting before he'd compromise. "That's how he raised me," Evelyn said softly. "My mother used to say I got my stubbornness from him." "It's not stubbornness, it's integrity." Thomas's eyes were closing now, exhaustion finally winning. It's what I envied most about him, what I missed most after. Scout had fallen asleep between them, his golden body stretched across the bed, his breathing slow and steady. In sleep, the dog looked impossibly young, all the weariness of his journey through the storm erased. "He found you," Thomas murmured, already half asleep himself. "I sent him out every day for a week, hoping. The staff thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But he found you. He brought you home." His voice trailed off, and within moments, he was asleep. Margaret appeared silently, as she always seemed to, and guided Evelyn and Harold back to the East Suite. The storm had finally begun to quiet, the wind dying down, the snowfall thinning from a curtain to a veil. "You should rest," Margaret said. "Tomorrow will bring more decisions, more conversations, but tonight you're safe." "That's enough. Safe." When had Evelyn last felt safe? Before the power of attorney papers, before the consolidated accounts, before her children had begun their slow, methodical theft of everything she and Harold had built. But she felt it now, in this strange house, with this dying stranger and his loyal dog, and a staff that looked at her like she was something precious. "Margaret," she said, as the housekeeper turned to go, "how long has Scout been going out? Looking for us, I mean." Margaret paused at the door. 5 days. Every morning he'd go to the gate and wait to be let out. We tried to stop him. The weather was dangerous, and he's not young anymore. But he'd just sit there, crying, until we opened the gates. Then he'd be gone for hours, sometimes all day, coming back exhausted but determined. How did he know to look for us? How did he know we were coming? Margaret's expression softened. "I don't know, Mrs. Marsh. Mr. Aldridge believes Scout could sense his wish, his desperate need to find you before it was too late. I think," she hesitated, "I think animals understand more than we give them credit for. And I think that dog would do anything for the man who saved him." "Saved him?" "Scout was a rescue. Mr. Aldridge found him 7 years ago, on the side of this very road, hit by a car, left to die in a ditch. He stopped his car, wrapped the dog in his coat, and drove an hour through a storm to find an emergency vet. Most people would have kept driving." Margaret smiled. "Mr. Aldridge isn't most people." After she left, Evelyn lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. Beside her, Harold's breathing was slow and even sleep finally claiming him after the worst day of their lives, or perhaps the best. She couldn't tell anymore. Everything was tangled together. Betrayal and redemption, loss and discovery, grief, and something that felt almost like hope. Scout had been saved by Thomas, and now Scout had saved them. The symmetry felt too perfect to be coincidence. It felt like something else, fate, maybe, or grace, or the simple truth that kindness has a way of coming back around, even when it takes decades, even when it passes through strangers and storms and the darkest nights of the soul. Morning came gray and quiet, the storm spent at last. Evelyn woke to pale light filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere in the vast house. Harold was already up, standing at the window, looking out at a world transformed by snow. "It's beautiful," he said, without turning. "I've never seen so much snow. The whole valley is buried." Evelyn joined him at the window. He was right. The landscape had been remade overnight, every harsh edge softened, every dark thing covered in white. The road they'd traveled was completely invisible, buried beneath drifts that reached higher than the mansion's first-floor windows in places. "We couldn't leave if we wanted to," Harold observed. "Not for days, maybe a week. Do you want to?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned to look at her. "I don't know what I want, Evie. I thought I knew who our children were. I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought we'd done right by them. I thought the love we gave them was enough. Maybe it was." She took his hand, threaded her fingers through his. Maybe they just wanted more than love could give. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret entered with a breakfast tray, her expression carrying news. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." She set the tray on the sitting room table. Eggs, toast, fruit, more coffee. "Mr. Aldridge is asking for you when you've had a chance to eat. He says there's something he forgot to tell you last night, and he's worried he'll run out of time." The words hung in the air, run out of time. A reminder that the man who had searched for them for 3 years, who had sent his dog into a blizzard to find them, was dying. They ate quickly and followed Margaret through the now familiar hallways to Thomas's study. He was awake, propped up in his hospital bed, looking somehow smaller than he had the night before. Scout lay beside him, the dog's head resting on his master's chest, rising and falling with each labored breath. "You came back," Thomas said, as if he'd been uncertain. "I worried. After everything I told you, I worried you might not want to see me again." "You saved our lives," Evelyn said simply. "Your dog saved our lives. The least we can do is listen to whatever you need to say." Thomas smiled, but it cost him. She could see the effort in the lines around his mouth, the shadow of pain behind his eyes. "There's one more thing I need to tell you. One more piece of the story." He paused, gathering strength. "It's about your daughter, Karen." Evelyn's heart stuttered. "What about Karen?" 2 years ago, when my investigator was tracking your family's finances, he discovered something unexpected. Your daughter Karen had been asking questions, poking around in her siblings' business dealings, requesting information about the power of attorney documents, trying to find out why certain accounts had been consolidated. Thomas took a careful breath. She figured out what her brothers and sister were doing, and she tried to stop them. The argument, the sudden distance, Karen's disappearance from family gatherings. Rachel found out, Thomas continued. She and Michael threatened Karen with, I'm not sure what exactly, something that frightened her enough to make her back off. But before she did, Karen managed to get copies of the fraudulent documents. She's been holding on to them for 2 years, waiting for an opportunity to use them, waiting for proof that wouldn't just be her word against her siblings. "How do you know all this?" Harold demanded. "Because Karen found me." Thomas's eyes were bright now, alive with something fierce. 6 months ago, she tracked down my investigator and asked to meet. She'd been looking for the person behind all those letters her siblings were intercepting. She wanted to understand who was trying to reach her parents and why. Margaret had moved to a corner of the room, and now she returned with an envelope, a simple white envelope, unremarkable, the kind you might use for a birthday card. "She asked me to give you this," Thomas said. "She's been afraid to contact you directly. Afraid her siblings would find out and follow through on their threats. But she wanted you to know the truth. She wanted you to know she tried." Evelyn took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front in Karen's familiar handwriting, the same careful letters that had once spelled out "I love you, Mom" on construction paper cards, the same script that had signed Christmas cards and birthday messages for 40 years. She opened it. "Dear Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, then Mr. Aldridge's plan worked. I'm so sorry I couldn't warn you sooner. I'm sorry I disappeared when you needed me most. Rachel and Michael threatened to have me committed if I didn't stop asking questions. They said they'd tell the doctors I was having a breakdown, that I was making up paranoid conspiracies about my own family, and maybe I was afraid they could make it stick, but I never stopped trying. I've been gathering evidence for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. Mr. Aldridge gave me hope that moment would come. I love you both so much. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to fight harder. I'm sorry I let them win for so long. When this is over, when you're safe, I want to see you again. I want to explain everything face to face, but only if you want that too. I'll understand if you don't. Your daughter always, Karen P.S. I've enclosed copies of everything. Bank records, forged signatures, property transfers, all of it. Mr. Aldridge's lawyers say it's enough to put Rachel and Michael away for a very long time, but that's your choice to make, not mine. I just wanted you to have the truth." Evelyn looked up from the letter, tears streaming down her face again, but different tears this time. Not tears of grief or betrayal, tears of something else. "Karen," she whispered. "Our Karen. She never stopped loving you," Thomas said softly. "She never stopped fighting. She just had to do it from the shadows, where her siblings couldn't see." Harold took the letter from Evelyn's hands and read it himself. She watched his face as he processed the words, watched the journey from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like joy. "She didn't abandon us," he said finally. "She was protecting us, the only way she knew how. And now," Thomas said, Thanks to a blizzard and a very determined dog, you can protect each other." Scout raised his head at the mention of himself, tail wagging weakly. His golden eyes moved from Thomas to Evelyn to Harold, as if checking that everyone was still there, still safe, still together. "Good boy," Thomas murmured, stroking the dog's head. "Such a good boy." The snow took 5 days to melt enough for the roads to clear. 5 days of waiting, of planning, of long conversations in Thomas's study while Scout dozed between them. 5 days of learning who they were now that everything they'd believed had been stripped away. Thomas grew weaker as the days passed. The doctor came twice daily, adjusting medications, monitoring vitals, doing what little could be done for a man whose body had simply decided it was time. But his mind remained sharp, and he used every lucid hour to ensure that Evelyn and Harold understood what was coming, what choices they had, what their future could look like if they were brave enough to claim it. "The foundation is already established," he explained on the 3rd day, his voice thinner now, but still steady. "The Robert Whitmore Foundation for Economic Justice. It will provide legal aid to elderly victims of financial exploitation, people like you who trusted family members and were betrayed. The irony isn't lost on me." "It's not ironic," Evelyn said. "It's redemption." Thomas smiled at that, the expression softening the sharp angles illness had carved into his face. "Redemption. Yes, I suppose that's what I've been chasing all these years." On the 4th day, Karen arrived. The sound of a car engine in the driveway brought everyone to the windows. Margaret, the household staff, even Dr. Harrison, who had stayed overnight due to concerns about Thomas's declining condition. Scout was the first to react, leaping from his place beside Thomas's bed and racing through the halls, his injured leg apparently forgotten in his excitement. By the time Evelyn and Harold reached the entrance hall, the front door was already open. A woman stood in the doorway, snow dusting her dark hair, her face pale with cold and something else. Fear, maybe, or hope, or some combination too complex to name. Karen. She looked older than Evelyn remembered. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. A tiredness in her posture that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. But her eyes were the same, warm brown, like her father's, filled now with tears she was clearly fighting to contain. "Mom," she whispered. "Dad." For a long moment, no one moved. The weight of 2 years of silence pressed down on them. All the missed holidays and unanswered phone calls and family gatherings that Karen had been forbidden to attend. Evelyn thought of all the times she'd asked Rachel about Karen, all the excuses she'd been given, all the lies she'd believed because the alternative was too painful to consider. Then Harold stepped forward, opened his arms, and Karen fell into them like a child coming home from a nightmare. "I'm sorry," she was saying, the words muffled against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to warn you. But they said they'd—" "Shh." Harold's voice was rough with emotion. "You're here now. That's what matters. You're here." Evelyn joined them, wrapping her arms around her daughter and her husband, holding on as if the storm might return at any moment and tear them apart again. Scout circled them, tail wagging frantically, inserting himself into the embrace as if he, too, understood that this was a moment of healing, a moment of family knitting itself back together after being torn. They stood like that for a long time, 3 people and a golden dog, silhouetted against the snow-bright doorway of a mansion that had become, impossibly, a kind of home. Karen had brought everything. 2 years of careful documentation, organized in binders and folders, backed up on multiple drives, stored in locations her siblings didn't know existed. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers. Property records revealing the loans taken out in her parents' names. Email threads between Rachel and Michael discussing how to manage the situation when Evelyn and Harold started asking questions. Recorded phone calls, legal in their state with single-party consent, in which her siblings discussed the Ridgemont property and how much rent they could extract before their parents aged out of the equation. "I couldn't stop them directly," Karen explained, spreading the documents across the massive dining room table. "Rachel has connections, lawyers, doctors, people who would have backed her story if she'd tried to have me declared incompetent. so I played along. I pretended to accept her explanations, stayed away from family events so I wouldn't slip up, and I gathered evidence. Every piece I could find. 2 years, Harold said quietly. You spent 2 years living a lie to protect us. You spent 40 years working yourself to the bone to protect me. Karen's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she organized the papers. Rachel and Michael and David, they forgot what you sacrificed. I never did. Thomas's lawyers arrived that afternoon, 3 of them, serious men and women in dark suits who spoke in careful legalese but whose eyes showed genuine warmth when they looked at Evelyn and Harold. They reviewed Karen's evidence, cross-referenced it with their own investigations, and by evening had outlined a path forward. You have several options. The lead attorney, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Vance, explained. Criminal prosecution is certainly viable. Forgery, elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud. Your other children could face significant prison time. Or, she continued, we pursue civil remedies. Recovery of stolen assets, damages, injunctions preventing further contact. This route is faster, less public, and doesn't require you to testify against your own children in a criminal trial. What would you recommend? Harold asked. Patricia exchanged glances with her colleagues. Honestly, a combination. Criminal referral to establish the record, civil action to recover what was taken, and a restraining order to ensure they can never access your finances again. Your daughter Karen's evidence makes all of this straightforward. The question is whether you want to pursue it. Evelyn looked at Harold, then at Karen, then at the mountain of paperwork that represented her children's betrayal. 3 of her 4 children had conspired to steal everything she and Harold had built. They had forged signatures, manipulated accounts, sold the family home, and sent their parents to die in a mountain cabin while pocketing the proceeds. But they were still her children. She had carried them in her body, nursed them through fevers, sat up with them during nightmares, worked until her hands bled to give them opportunities she'd never had. The love didn't disappear just because the betrayal was revealed. It just complicated things. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Patricia began gathering the documents. Take all the time you need. We'll be ready when you are. That night, Evelyn sat alone with Thomas while the others slept. The old man's breathing had grown more labored over the past few days, each exhale carrying a whistle that the doctor said indicated fluid building in his lungs. Scout lay pressed against his side, the dog's warmth, a comfort that no medicine could provide. You're struggling with the decision, Thomas said. It wasn't a question. They're my children. They're also criminals who tried to kill you. His voice was gentle, but the words were blunt. That road, Evelyn, that storm. If Scout hadn't found you, I know. Do you? He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. I spent 60 years trying to convince myself that what I did to your father wasn't as bad as it seemed, that he would have been fine, that he would have recovered, that I hadn't really destroyed him. I told myself stories to make the guilt bearable. He reached out, and Evelyn took his hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were fierce. Your children told themselves stories, too, that you didn't really need that money, that you wouldn't notice the missing assets, that the cabin in Ridgemont was perfectly adequate, and if you died there, well, at least they wouldn't have to worry anymore. He squeezed her hand. Don't make excuses for them. Don't let love blind you to what they really are. What are they? Exactly what I was. Greedy, selfish, willing to sacrifice someone else's life for their own comfort. His voice cracked. The only difference is, I lived long enough to regret it. Maybe if they face consequences now, they'll have the chance to regret it too. Maybe that's the kindest thing you can do for them. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to thank you for staying with me this far. If Evelyn and Harold's journey has meant something to you, please take a moment to subscribe and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late for justice, for healing, for finding the family that truly loves us. Thomas Aldridge died on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after the storm. It happened quietly, in the soft gray light of dawn, with Scout curled against his side and Evelyn holding his hand. He'd asked her to be there at the end. Not Margaret, not the doctor, but Evelyn, the daughter of the man he'd wronged, the woman he'd spent 3 years trying to find. "Thank you," he whispered, in the final hour, "for forgiving me." "Thank you," she replied, "for never stopping, for sending Scout into the storm, for giving us a chance." His last breath came as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. Scout lifted his head, whined once, then lay back down, pressing closer to the body that had been his home for 7 years. The funeral was small. Thomas had outlived most of his friends and had no family to speak of. But the household staff came, and Dr. Harrison, and the lawyers who had worked with him for decades. Karen stood between her parents, her hand in her mother's, as a pastor who had never met Thomas spoke words about redemption and grace. Afterward, Patricia Vance read the will. Everything, the mansion, the company holdings, the investments, the charitable foundations, went to the trust established in Evelyn and Harold's names. The total value, when all assets were calculated, exceeded $240 million. "He wanted you to have options," Patricia explained. "You can live here, sell the property, donate everything, or any combination. The trust is structured to protect these assets from any claims your other children might make. They cannot touch this money, ever." "And Scout?" Harold asked, because of course he did. The dog hadn't left Thomas's bedside since the death, refusing food, refusing water, just lying there in silent grief. "Scout is specifically mentioned in the will," Patricia said with a small smile. "Mr. Aldridge established a separate fund for his care and named you as his guardians. He hoped," she cleared her throat, "he hoped the dog might help you the way he helped Mr. Aldridge. Apparently, Scout has a gift for finding people who need him." Evelyn looked at the golden retriever, still lying on Thomas's empty bed, his muzzle gray with age, his eyes holding a sorrow that seemed almost human. "Come here, Scout," she called softly. The dog raised his head, looked at her for a long moment, then slowly climbed down from the bed. He crossed the room with the careful dignity of an old soul who had seen too much, and pressed his body against Evelyn's legs. "Good boy," she murmured, stroking his soft fur. "Such a good boy." They decided to stay, not forever perhaps, but for now, for the winter at least, while they figured out what their new lives would look like. The mansion was too large for 3 people and a dog, but it was also warm, safe, and paid for, which was more than they'd had a week ago. Karen moved into one of the guest suites and began the slow process of reconnecting with parents she'd been forced to abandon. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of 2 years' silence, sharing stories that had been hoarded in isolation. Evelyn learned that Karen had been seeing a therapist to deal with the guilt of not being able to stop her siblings, that she'd nearly called a dozen times but always lost her nerve, that she'd cried for days when she heard about the house being sold. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Karen admitted one evening, as they sat by the fire in the East Suite. "I thought Rachel would send you somewhere I'd never find, and you'd die thinking I didn't care. We thought you'd abandoned us," Evelyn said honestly. It hurt more than anything else. Not Rachel's schemes or Michael's greed, just the idea that our youngest, our sweetest, had walked away. "I should have been braver." "You were brave enough. You just had to be careful too." Evelyn took her daughter's hand. "We're here now. That's what matters." Scout had begun to recover from his grief, though he was quieter now, more thoughtful. He spent his days moving between family members, checking on each of them, as if ensuring that no one else would disappear. At night, he slept at the foot of Evelyn and Harold's bed, his warm weight a comfort against the lingering cold of a winter that had almost killed them. The confrontation came 3 weeks after the funeral, when the roads were fully clear and the lawyers had finished filing the necessary paperwork. Rachel arrived first, in a rental car that she drove up the mansion's long driveway with the aggressive speed of someone who couldn't believe what she was seeing. Michael came an hour later, and David after that, all of them apparently summoned by the same news. Their parents, presumed dead or safely isolated in Ridgemont, had surfaced as the beneficiaries of a $200 million estate. Margaret met them at the door and refused to let them in. "Mrs. and Mr. Marsh have instructed me to inform you that you are not welcome on this property," she said, her voice carrying the steel of someone who had witnessed too much to be intimidated. "Any communication must go through their attorneys." "This is insane," Rachel snapped. "Those are our parents. We have a right to see them." "You have no rights here," Margaret replied. "The property is privately owned, and the owners have made their wishes clear. I want to talk to them myself. That won't be possible." The argument continued, growing louder, until Scout appeared at Margaret's side. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there, his golden eyes fixed on Rachel with an intensity that made her step back involuntarily. "What is that thing doing here?" Michael demanded. "Whose dog is that?" "He belongs to the estate," Margaret said, "and he's an excellent judge of character." From an upstairs window, Evelyn watched her children, 3 of her 4 children, rage and threaten and eventually retreat to their cars. Rachel was on her phone before she'd even closed the door, probably calling her lawyer. Michael kicked the tire of his rental in frustration. David just sat in his driver's seat, staring at the mansion with an expression Evelyn couldn't read. "Are you all right?" Harold asked, coming to stand beside her. "No," she admitted, "but I will be." The legal process took months. Rachel and Michael fought everything, contested the will, challenged the trust structure, filed motion after motion in an attempt to claw back some portion of the fortune they believed should be theirs. Their lawyers argued that Thomas Aldridge had been mentally incompetent, that Evelyn and Harold had unduly influenced him, that the whole arrangement was fraudulent. None of it worked. Patricia Vance and her team had anticipated every objection, prepared for every attack. Thomas had undergone regular mental competency evaluations, documented by independent physicians. The trust was structured according to decades of case law, and Karen's evidence of her siblings' crimes hung over every proceeding like a sword, ready to fall if they pushed too hard. In the end, Rachel and Michael accepted a settlement. They would drop all claims to the estate in exchange for the family not pursuing criminal charges. It was more than they deserved. But Evelyn couldn't bring herself to send her own children to prison. Maybe that was weakness. Maybe it was love. She'd stopped trying to tell the difference. David was different. He'd been the youngest of the conspirators, the one who'd gone along rather than led. And when the settlement was being negotiated, he asked to speak with his parents directly. They met in a neutral location, a lawyer's office in the nearest city, with attorneys present on both sides. David looked older than his 42 years, his face lined with stress, his hands restless in his lap. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, not quite meeting their eyes. I want you to know I didn't understand what we were doing." Rachel said it was for the best. She said you weren't capable of managing your own affairs anymore. She said the nursing home in Ridgemont had excellent care, that you'd be happier there. "Did you believe that?" Harold asked. His voice was neutral, but Evelyn could feel the tension in his body. David was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted to believe it. It was easier than asking questions. And the letters? The calls? The documents from Mr. Aldridge?" "Rachel handled those. She said they were scams." "I didn't." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I didn't want to know, so I didn't look." It wasn't an apology. Not really. It wasn't accountability, but it was honesty, and that was something. "I hope you find what you're looking for, David," Evelyn said finally. "I hope you become someone your children can be proud of, but I can't have you in my life anymore. Not after this." David nodded slowly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I understand." He left without another word, and Evelyn watched him go with a grief that had no clean edges. Grief for the son she'd raised, the man he'd become, the relationship they would never have again. The story you've just heard is a reminder that sometimes the darkest roads lead to unexpected light. If it touched your heart, I hope you'll carry its message with you, that kindness returned is the only wealth that matters, that family is who shows up, and that it's never too late to find your way home. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, please share it with them. Until next time, take care of each other.